Welcome back, everybody, to Dungeon Brew. Today, Diana and I are continuing our conversation on narrative design, talking about morality and motivations. Stay tuned. Welcome back, everybody, to Dungeon Brew. Today, Diana and I are talking about morality and motivations. And I'm a little out of breath because I just finished chasing a cat. So bear with me as I catch my breath. So, Diana, why don't you start us off and tell us how are we defining morality and motivations? These are huge topics.
Huge, but pretty simple, sort of, I guess, straightforward.
Yeah.
Morality is that distinction between what is right and wrong, or good and evil. Motivation is what kind of drives the character, and it's like the reasoning behind the way that they behave. I like to think about this in like the Fellowship of the Ring. You have everybody kind of has the general overarching concept that they're,
Mm-hmm.
moving forward to destroy the ring. But if you were to talk to Boromir, who's got the attitude of, like legacy and reputation, he's going to have a very different response as to why he's doing it versus Frodo, who's the little homely hobbit who just wants to, keep his home safe. But
Mm-hmm.
that's kind of the way that I approach that thinking.
Yeah, absolutely. And so when we're looking at this in terms of design for a story, we're talking about how we're developing this or how we're creating this for, our non-player characters that we're putting within the world that are players and their characters are going to be interacting with, and how we're building those stories behind them, and looking at maybe how they themselves understand concepts like right and wrong and what they themselves are motivated by, just like you would say with Boromir or Frodo.
Yeah, and this kind of goes back into the world building aspect of like laws and, kind of the expectations that you build the world with. I mean, your characters' moralities or their motivations are going to also be affected by what is typical within the world or what is acceptable when it comes to law, things like that.
Yeah, and we've seen this change in the course of TTRPGs across the board. I mean, old editions would look at things as just being good or chaotic or neutral, and then we started having a more challenging or more broadened aspect of like looking at your lawful good versus your chaotic evil, your neutral good versus your neutral evil, and kind of having this wider variety of characterizations for these types of things. For me, when I'm creating NPCs, I don't necessarily always go that route though, and looking at things as being good and evil. It's more of action and consequences, and looking again at what they're motivated by. I always think of this line I heard in a movie that, crazy people don't know that they're crazy. And I also kind of
Mhm.
apply that to evil people don't know they're evil. It's more of this is what they're motivated by, and what they are willing to sacrifice or what they're willing to give up to have those motivations accessible to them, or to be able to achieve those motivations.
Yeah, I remember actually having this conversation for the first time with you a long time ago when it came to, good and evil and kind of that mentality. And it kind of, I think changed my approach when it comes to even writing because, yeah, your world might have certain laws or something, but, there's going to be different religions within those laws, and certain religions are going to have certain allowances for what's okay. Like blood sacrifice is just
Mm-hmm.
it's a thing that a religion might do, for the sake of bringing better crops or, having their women be more fertile, whatever it is that they're going for. Whereas, other people who are not going to be part of that sect or something are going to be like, whoa, that's too much. That's evil. That's awful.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that's kind of that, what's that word? I think that's a way to kind of think about it when you're coming into, creating the different motivations there. But no, I agree that that's, I think, the more open-ended way to approach even world building when it comes to motivations and morality, because you kind of have to consider the different backgrounds of everyone.
Yeah, and
That
that's
sounded kind of rambly.
no. It comes down to the point that when you're creating characters to populate your world, is having a good understanding of their environment, how they're raised, what the rules are within that environment, what the cultures are, what the religions are within that environment, and then aligning them or even not aligning them with those things specifically to determine whether or not they're perceived as being a good or evil character. You as the GM may not think that they're good or evil particularly, but you want to make sure that they fit within that environment so that they have this certain perception or this certain ambiance about them, and so they're being perceived in a certain way. And it's important to know where they stand within the greater culture so you know how they're going to interact with your NPCs. If you come into a tavern and you have a barkeep who doesn't agree with the local blood cult that is popular in the region, and he has some varying views around that. He may be kind of quiet about it and not want to speak about it. You yourself may believe that he's good and that his opposing beliefs are positive, but in the culture itself, they would be rejected. So he's not going to be as outspoken about them. So he's going to be kind of quiet and underhanded about it, which may mean that he may not be as willing to help the characters in a way that you may find in another culture if he was brought up there, where it may not be, or maybe more prominent to be more altruistic in nature and not, sprinkle blood on the altar to make the women more fertile.
Yeah, and it also creates more room, I think, to extend your story if necessary. I mean, if one of your players comes in and makes an announcement of, "Hey, he's like this is what he
Mm-hmm.
believes," then it's going to be a whole struggle of him losing business or how people,
Mm-hmm.
the patrons are going to respond differently to him. So that just adds a little extra depth, and you could go a little further in all sorts of different directions with that.
But I will say, with every character that I make in a game, I like to know what their motivations are. In fact, I make little tags by the character in their notes section to know what motivates them. Are they motivated by family? Are they motivated by altruism? Are they motivated by a god? Because that lets me know how they're going to respond to characters. Too often, we get like these cookie cutter NPCs that are in games that just respond in a way that you would expect them to, but not all of them should be motivated the same way. If you come into a tavern and you want to get your free room, and so the bard's like, I'm going to play music for you on the stage and give you a free room, most players expect that to happen because it's just like a typical trope that we find within game settings. But what if your innkeeper has a agreement that is signed with the local magistrate to always have a certain number of rooms available for soldiers when they're passing through, and he's an extremely lawful innkeeper that is bound by that agreement and would not break away from it no matter what, he should still tell the characters no. And so knowing
Mhm.
that one innkeeper in one tavern may respond one way versus another one, I think brings your game more depth than it would have regularly.
Oh yeah, I love that. And before we continue on, if you viewers are enjoying our content, please remember to go ahead and like and subscribe and click that little bell to be notified of any future videos that we have coming up.
So one more thing that we might dive into here that I think can give us some good conversation is talking about your characters developing their own morality and their own motivations that they're creating in your world so that you as a GM can create NPCs that can be responsive to that. And that's why this falls underneath system design, is because you want the individuals that you populate the world with to be responsive and reactive to your characters and the decisions that they make.
Hmm. So ask me that question again. I
Well, I didn't really say
need
it
to
as a
reframe.
question, but
Oh, okay.
yeah, but the question would be, in creating or in having your players create their motivations and their morality, so to speak, for the game. How do you decide how the NPCs are going to be structured in terms of having those that are opposing to them as the bad guys and those that are going to ally with them in terms of believing or thinking the same things?
See, as a non-GM, that's kind of hard to answer. I'm thinking immediately of how I would have structured this in writing, or how I would have approached this in, writing a
Which,
book. Because,
yeah,
huh?
I was gonna say what you would do anyway. I mean, you're not gonna have
Yeah,
your bad guy in your book have the same morals and values and ethics as your main character. So
yeah. I mean,
you
it all comes down to, what the overall plot is, first of all, and how your surrounding laws and, even environment, depending on where you're at, is going to affect all of that. I'm not entirely sure how to approach this.
Well, my approach typically with it is that let's say that I'm running a good campaign. And so I sit down in session zero with my players, and they all tell me that, they want to bring peace to the world, love to the world, generic altruism. They're bringing out positivity in the world. So when I create my campaign, I'm going to create a bad guy who's opposing to that, wants to bring chaos, destruction, etc. I might have NPCs in the world that stand against that, mini bosses that stand against that. So there's now conflict that's going to come about because there's an opposing morality and there's opposing motivations for what they're wanting to achieve. And this is the same thing I do in a book. If I'm writing a book
Mhm.
about evil characters and it's from their perspective, I am making their antagonist extremely good natured and positive and lawful and going out and doing good things because they're opposing him, and that brings about the conflict.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's how you come up with the conflict. You have to consider, what the once again back to the emotional state too, what the emotional reactions are going to be when you're being faced with somebody
Mm-hmm.
who is so against what it is that you stand for. But I think it really comes down to really just being able to put yourself in the shoes of somebody who, it has that more altruistic, mentality versus somebody who maybe has lost everything when they were really young and has to essentially, fend for themselves and kind of nurtures this like me kind of survival mentality.
Mm-hmm. And don't feel like we're giving you guys too many black and white examples here because there's definitely areas of gray that you should be exploring with the characters that you're creating
Mhm.
as well. Um, yes, you can have your goody two shoe white knights that are out there that are doing great things, and you can have your men all clad in black that are stabbing orphans and widows in the streets. But you can also have your anti-heroes and your individuals that they are motivated by certain things that also lead them to engage in actions that aren't necessarily welcomed by the society that they're in.
Yeah, I this brings to mind one of the characters in one of my books is this immortal bodyguard. There's two immortal
Mm-hmm.
bodyguards, and they're typically bound by this like need for responsibility,
Mm-hmm.
or bound by this responsibility to, stick to the laws. One of them, though, kind of goes off the deep end and experiences a very worldly sense of, of pleasure and,
Mm-hmm.
having certain things that start kind of turning on different parts of his mind where he's like, wait a second, I like this. I want to spend more time there. I want to do more of this. And he starts walking away from that responsibility. And that creates, issues later down the line where it's like, okay, this is what you are called to do, but you
Mm-hmm.
keep stepping into that other side and kind of puts him in that gray with the other characters, with everybody else who has to kind of deal with the fact that they have this person who's supposed to be this protector and this
Mm-hmm.
sort of like a savior kind of mentality that is no longer that, though he kind of has started out that way. But I think that was, I guess, just an example I'm trying to provide of that little gray area as well.
Yeah, which I think is a great example on how to utilize this. Um, the other thing that I was going to mention that I don't want to forget before we end today is just talking about making sure that you're creating moral quandaries within your game, so that the characters then have to make decisions that can shape their characters. And if you have NPCs in the game that are faced by those two, have it impact your NPCs. If the
Mm-hmm.
characters are traveling along and they come across this scenario where, let's say that they come across a scenario where the local guard is hanging a witch, and they have to make a choice on whether or not they're going to stand against that law and save the woman who's being hanged, or they have to rescue her. How's that going to impact the NPC that's traveling along with them, and how does
Mm-hmm.
that align with or go against that NPC's own morality? And how they perceive that. Do they then stay with the characters? Are they less likely to help the characters in battle because they don't believe as much in the cause based on whatever the
Mm-hmm.
decision was that was being made, and so on? Have there be real responses and real consequences to some of those things, because that is going to drive the tension and the storytelling within that moment. And again, we put this in system design because when you're talking about morality and motivations, it should be fueled by the decisions that your players are making in the course of the game.
Yeah, I personally, I loathe morality, these quandaries, whatever, however you put it. I've always hated these things, but no, that is definitely something that, I mean, it keeps the, what do you call it? The
Suspense.
suspend the, yes, suspension of disbelief
Mm-hmm.
alive, when you do apply things like that in there, because I mean that's how life is. You're always going to be faced with something, but it also, it keeps your gamers or your readers or whatever kind of like on their toes at the same time, just continuously pushing forward to see, okay, well, what happens next then? What is this really going to hurt uh or affect in the long run?
And I'll say for me as a gamer, I love coming into a game each week and going, I don't know what the hell's going to happen next, but I know it's going to be an emotional roller coaster. Like, that's a lot of fun for me.
That's how I write.
All right, so in summary, sit down with your characters, determine what their morality is going to be for their characters, what their motivations are going to be. And then while you're designing your game, you're going to look at allies and enemies within the course of the storytelling. They're going to align with those and go against those, oppose those, so that you can then build tension and build the course of the story throughout. And you're going to maintain that through your gameplay.
All right.
All right, that's all we're telling you guys. Now
That's
get
it.
get
That's
out of here. All right, bye.
it.